Welcome to the StarPodLog comic scene with your hosts, Jeff and Tony.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wiley.
And I'm Tony Barletta.
Welcome to the comic scene on StarPodLog.
Glad to be back.
Tony, man, it's been a minute. How you been? And maybe more importantly, have you recovered from DragonCon and the virtual event that they put on this year?
Yeah, I mean, everybody was obviously sad that we couldn't actually put DragonCon on in person as we always have every single year. But, you know, being able to put on a virtual DragonCon, I think it went over terrific. I mean, I think we gave fans something to get excited about for 4 days or 5 days. It started Thursday, actually. And it was a lot of more work than I expected, putting panels together, coming up with ideas, seeing who all wanted to be involved, and, you know, finding time when people could record and get the videos if they needed help getting videos together. But I think the results speak for themselves. I mean, I think they're great. I mean, I think we put on awesome panels. Anybody out there curious, there's a bunch of them still up on our Facebook page, DragonCon Comics and Pop Art Facebook page. And there's also more panels in the main programming that you can access by subscribing to DragonCon.tv for $10.
I thought it was great. The content that I've watched thus far, I thought it was great. I thought it was very well constructed, and thought all the volunteers really did a great job putting everything together, man.
Yeah, it's always rewarding when I see ideas I had for panels come together and make, you know, really good panels. And my senior director did a lot of work and put a lot of great ideas together and got a lot of talent. And, we're able to put, you know, I knew we wanted to do a Denny O'Neil panel this year, and you know, I reached out to Andrew Gaska, and he was able to bring in people like Howard Chaykin and Paul Levitz. I mean, that was amazing. There's some really great stuff on there.
We'll circle back, and our episode this time around is we are planning to release this episode on or around Batman Day 2020, which is this Saturday. Is that the 19th? Tony and I are going to discuss our favorite Batman stories. So we cooked up this idea just last night, and what we're going to do is we're going to discuss each of our 3 favorite Batman stories, and we're going to drop a few honorable mentions in there as well. Tony and I have only discussed the idea. We have not discussed our individual picks. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what, you know, if we show some of the same stories or same runs. I think this is going to be a fun episode, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear what your favorite stories are, for sure.
All right, so we'll sort of count them down, and Tony will discuss one, and I will discuss one, and we'll kind of bat it back and forth. So, Tony, what is your 3rd favorite Batman story?
I would say it's possible that this is stuck in my mind because of the DC fandom event, which was all day last Saturday, which was pretty amazing. They had all this content on there for free, but it was only for 24 hours. And I watched story of Jim Lee. And so, you know, it reminded me of just how powerful Hush was. And, I mean, the biggest thing about Hush being a 12-issue run, I believe it was, and also, I mean, Jim Lee's art made that book special. It made it just jump off the stands.
100% agree.
And we'd never really seen Batman art that jumped off the stands the way Hush jumped off the stands. And you know, the story was so great. The story introduced a brand new villain who is still around today. He even shows up in Batwoman TV show. I'd say it's a pretty important story and a beautifully drawn and colored and book by the art team. It's a phenomenal book.
I agree with everything you said. I think that Jim Lee is certainly the modern definitive Batman artist, and I would, my personal taste in art, I would prefer his interpretation of Batman more than Greg Capullo.
Okay.
But that's my personal taste. But
yeah, they're both different. They both have their own strengths. Yeah.
Dropping Greg Capullo's name actually leads me to my third favorite Batman story. And when you and I cooked up this idea, I told you last night when we were talking about this, I said I know two of my three favorite stories right away. I just didn't know the order of a couple of them. And I struggled whether to put this one at 2 or 3, and I put it at 3 just a hair behind my second choice, but I went with The Court of Owls for number 3.
Okay.
I think it's an innovative story. I think it's very, very modern take on Batman. Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, to me, this was, and they are certainly a dynamic duo creative team, but to me, this particular story was their finest hour.
Definitely. And Capullo's artwork, I mean, he used so many new experimental ways of designing page layouts. It's just, so much was introduced there we hadn't seen before.
It really turned the whole mythos of Batman and This Is My City, really turned that on its ear. It really made you think, maybe Batman does not know Gotham as well as he believes he does.
True. I mean, here's a whole thing that had been hidden, never talked about, and it was this massive threat.
It was great. It was great. It's one of those stories that I can reread every so often and still enjoy it.
Yeah, I think anybody could pick that up and just get right into it, and it's going to be that way for years to come.
All right, man. What's your number 2 Batman story?
So I think it was around 1986, and I'm sure this title's probably on many people's lists. I was getting into comics. I got into comics in the 70s as a kid, and I remember about 86, I was just starting junior high or just out of junior high, starting high school, somewhere around there. And, I was buying some books that tied into cartoon shows and such. But I remember when this came out, it was so different than anything on the stands. And all of a sudden it was like, why am I buying these books? This is what I should be buying here. Batman Dark Knight Returns it's hard. I mean, it changed people's perception of what a Batman story could be. And it presented Batman in an intelligent and adult way that hadn't been seen before. I mean, Frank Miller's writing has never been better than on that first Dark Knight Returns series. And the artwork, and especially the Klaus Janson inks, everything just jumped off the page. It was just so different and so monumental at the time, and that still holds up today.
I agree. Up until, I'm like you, I had been reading comics since I was probably about 6 years old in the 70s. And up until I was about 16, I read every Spider-Man title I could get my hands on. Whether it was Amazing or Spectacular or Marvel Tales or Team Up, whatever book Spider-Man appeared in, I couldn't get my hands on it fast enough. But when The Dark Knight Returns came out, it really was a not just a comic moment, but it was a cultural moment. I remember reading a story, an article in Rolling Stone magazine in '86 about The Dark Knight Returns and how what a shift it was for the character, for the DC Comics universe, and that's what led me to dive in and give it a read. And
wow,
that completely flipped the script for me. Like, I started reading Batman stories as soon as I could get my hands on them, and just became a massive fan. And that actually, you could actually credit Frank Miller's story with kind of launching Batman Mania, because that kind of started the crest of the wave. And then Tim Burton's movie came out a couple of years later, and that just the
sure.
bat symbol was ubiquitous in '89. But I think that you could really credit Frank Miller with kind of launching that.
I think a lot of us grew up enjoying the Batman TV show for what it was. And when I watched the Batman TV show, I always liked Robin the most. And I never understood why Batman was really there even sometimes. But we had that imitation of Batman, that version of Batman. Then we had the 70s comics that we grew up on gave us a detective, and that was really cool. But we'd never seen the kind of Batman that Frank Miller came up with, which was at the time like Clint Eastwood, as an older Clint Eastwood coming out of retirement. And looking back at his mistakes and pushing through the pain, we'd never seen that kind of Batman. And it was just so fascinating.
That's what drew me into it. This older, battle-weary soldier, really.
Yeah.
That was what drew me into it. And it is, I don't think it's overstating it to say that The Dark Knight Returns is one of the most influential comics ever.
Right.
I mean, some people will argue that it's dated. Well, sure, it's dated. Most 80s comics are, but I mean, in context of the entirety of the DC universe, and I would argue like comics, the genre in general, it was a complete game changer.
And it was probably right about the time that cyberpunk was starting to be big in the 80s too. It really tapped into that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point.
Yeah. And I feel that the Joker film this past year really borrowed from a lot of what the story elements from Dark Knight Returns. It almost looks like that Joker movie sets up that version of Gotham toward the end of the movie. I think that movie got what Frank Miller was trying for there. The use of satire to make scary points.
Right. Yeah.
It's an amazing story, and no one had ever seen anything like it.
The scene, just to go on a brief sidebar, the scene where Joaquin Phoenix's Joker is being interviewed by Robert De Niro, that was straight out of Dark Knight Returns.
Absolutely. In Dark Knight Returns, it was David Letterman.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that, but you're right. You're right.
And the mayhem in the street where everybody's fighting, I mean, that looks like Dark Knight Returns right there.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And you see the TV screens right before everybody starts fighting?
That's true. That's true. I need to go back and watch that again. I saw it once, but I need to go back and watch it again. I need to see if I can gain a
I picked it up on sale at Best Buy. It's definitely worth getting. So what's your second?
My number two. All right. This might surprise you a little bit, but this was a story that I just thought in its scale and the way it unfolded, I loved No Man's Land by Greg Rucka and Chuck Dixon.
Okay.
I thought, I know a lot of people it's a little bit of a divisive Batman story. I think a lot of people think it's a little bloated. Some people love it. I just think it's such an interesting idea for Gotham to be shut off from the rest of the country, and for Batman to kind of for everyone in Gotham, just a complete collapse of society, and it's just a fascinating premise.
Yeah, I have to admit I didn't read it when it came out, and the more I hear about it now, it certainly makes me curious to track it down and see what it looks like. It certainly does sound like one of those Batman stories that's kind of massive and unlike anything that came before it.
I know that they are getting ready to release an omnibus of Prelude to No Man's Land, and I used the word bloated a little while ago. If they're going to give No Man's Land the omnibus treatment, I can't say that I won't double dip and buy it, but I really think that the trade paperbacks, there were five volumes, and there was a sixth, the prequel called Cataclysm, that you could pick up, which is really, Cataclysm is a good read, but it's not a necessity to digest No Man's Land.
Okay.
But it's definitely worth your time to read, in my opinion.
Definitely have to track that down.
So
That was
before we
what,
get to our number one,
Greg Rucka, and was that Bob Gale, I believe, too?
Chuck Dixon,
Okay.
Greg Rucka. I know there were a couple of other writers
Wasn't Bob
involved,
Gale
but
I think he was the writer of Back to the Future, and he wrote some Batman work, too.
he may have. Dixon and Rucka wrote the lion's share of it.
Okay.
So
honorable mentions.
Honorable mentions. I actually was going to drop The Dark Knight Returns as an honorable mention. I couldn't just squeeze it into my top three, but you've got to throw it in that list.
Sure.
You got to throw it in. But what else did you have as an honorable mention?
So something that really struck me back in the early 90s when it came out was Legends of the Dark Knight. There's many amazing stories from those early Legends of the Dark Knight stories. They were all, all pretty much set back in year one days. And I guess one of them that really stood out the most to me was Batman Prey, Prey. Prey was about one of his most underutilized villains, but one of my favorites, Hugo Strange. Tries to break Batman, tries to make him go crazy, and Catwoman's in it as well. It's written by Doug Mensch and phenomenal artwork by Paul Gulacy, and it's a very noir kind of story, very atmospheric. It's definitely one to seek out if you haven't seen it before. But that's definitely one of my highlights of that whole series. And also, speaking of Dark Knight Returns, another thing that really struck me, they had an annual, and I believe it was Denny O'Neil wrote it. It was drawn by many different artists, and because of that, it was basically, there were hallucination stories, and you didn't understand why Batman's hallucinating. And, you had artwork in there by Joe Quesada, you had artwork covered by Mike Mignola, you had artwork by Keith Giffen, and by the end of it, you understand, and, you might disagree because Joker's done some heinous things, but in this particular story, he was tracking down Joker somewhere in the Arctic, somewhere in the snow, and Joker passes out and he can't move, and instead of leaving him to die, he is dragging him through the snow so he can face justice. And that really struck me. The fact that Batman cared so much about justice, he wouldn't let Joker die. That was more than just a simple Batman story to me.
No, I would agree with that sentiment. That's definitely true.
And that's something that only someone like Denny O'Neil would think of, too.
Yeah, that's very true.
What are some of your honorable mentions besides Dark Knight? Anything else?
Well, there was one, I have to mention this story. It's not, I don't think it gets a lot of talk because it wasn't released in a Batman book. It was released in a JLA book. Four issues, I think. JLA, I want to say 41 to 45. But it is a Batman-centric story. And if you've never read The Tower of Babel by Mark Waid, it is a fantastic Batman story.
Sure.
It's one, I would argue it is one of the most Batman stories ever in terms of who he is.
And they made a great animated film on it, too.
Yeah, Doom.
Yeah.
It's just so, Ra's al Ghul is basically, he's the main villain in the story. Batman's paranoia gets the best of him, and he basically comes up with countermeasures to take down every member of the Justice League if necessary, if they chose to go rogue. And his plans to do so fell into the wrong hands, and you can find the Tower of Babel in trade paperback in JLA. It's one of the JLA volumes. I think it's JLA number 4, volume 4. But it's such a good read. It doesn't get a lot of notoriety. It's a very worthwhile read.
Yeah, definitely an amazing story. And before we go to our number one, I mean, I just there are so many amazing Batman stories, I feel like I got to mention that Elseworlds probably has more amazing Batman stories than any other character has Elseworld stories.
I would agree with
that's definitely one to look at too. I mean, there's like Batman becomes Green Lantern. There's the amazing Doug Mensch wrote with amazing Kelly Jones art where Batman becomes a vampire. Batman Blood, and Gotham by Gaslight where he's looking for Jack the Ripper that also became an animated film. That's definitely a source of amazing Batman stories. And also another one to consider too is when you think about the popularity of Harley Quinn and I know her first appearance traces back to Batman Adventures. However, I recall Bruce Timm and Paul Dini doing Mad Love as a comic. I think they did the comic before they did it as an animated show.
I'm pretty certain you're right. About that.
So I mean, I would also definitely honorable mention.
I would throw into that list too. I don't think we can't do an episode like this and not at least mention Batman Year One.
True, absolutely.
Year One is, to me, I've been asked a couple of times by a couple of people, where's the starting point to start reading Batman? And to me, the answer is Batman Year One.
Yeah. That was only 4 issues, 4 regular-size issues. And he only wore the costume maybe toward the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Year 2's worth tracking down, too. Have you seen Year 2 before?
I've seen it. I've not read Year 2.
I have Year 2. It's written by Mike W. Barr, the longtime writer over at Detective. And Batman was carrying a gun on the cover of the first issue. He had a holster and a gun. And that was drawn by Alan Davis, who for whatever reason left after the first issue. And then the last 3 issues were all drawn by Todd McFarlane. And it's beautiful Todd McFarlane art drawing Batman.
But, Batman did wield a gun in some of the very early, the Golden Age stories.
Sure.
I know the whole talk of Batman not using a gun and not killing is kind of the dominant talking point today, but that wasn't the case in the Golden Age, in the late 30s and early 40s. He did use a gun regularly.
Yeah. And even Year 3, I don't know if you're familiar with Year 3, that was another great one where it was written by Wolfman and it was the introduction of Tim Drake. Covers were by Perez and interior art by Pat Broderick, Year 1, 2, and 3, but especially, there is nothing really compare Year 1 to.
No,
it is in a category by itself.
The whole Year 1 line, there was a Batgirl Year 1, there was a Robin Year 1, which I was actually very fond of. There was a Huntress Year 1, and there's some other characters. There's a Green Arrow Year 1?
Sure.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But the Year 1, it seems like they really, the writers really pour their hearts into those titles.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, man. Drum roll, please. What's your number 1 Batman story?
So it was around I just looked at it to try to get the date. 1977, so I must have been 5 years old. I had to have been older, though. But for whatever reason, it's dated 19... So it says came out when I was 5, but I think I was a little bit older. And at the time, I would get these comics at the drugstore after church from my parents, and they had the rack of the comics, And then they had magazines over in a different part. And I remember walking over where the magazines were, and they had the giant treasury-sized comics. And I'm telling my mom, we have to get this. And she's like, but it's $1. But I have to get it, look. And no other Batman story has ever made me feel the way I did when I was a kid when I saw that cover. It's Neil Adams, one of his most famous covers. It's basically the introduction of Ra's al Ghul it's 4 issues of reprints his first appearance and 3 issues after that. And it's Batman kneeling down and Robin's laying on the ground. You don't know if he's dead, and Batman's in agony, and Ra's al Ghul's over him. And that cover, I mean, it just spoke to me when I saw it as a kid. There's so much emotion and so much. And then when you open it, I mean, you have this treasury-size adventure where on page 1, Robin gets shot coming through a window, and you realize it's Ra's al Ghul that shot him, and you don't know who Ra's al Ghul is because he's brand new. And then he shows up in the Batcave and says, if you want to save Robin, you'll come with me. And, you know, he goes on this weird adventure with Ra's where they have to go through the snow. He has to fight, martial artists. He has to, it ends up in a massive sword fight in the desert, with Ra's, and he's only wearing a cowl. And to me, that there is no Batman story that can come close to that. I think it's
Wow.
basically a reprint of Batman 232, Ra's first appearance, and then 242 to 244. So it's 4 issues. But the story just goes. It's like a James Bond story with Batman and going through all these weird locations and things you wouldn't expect. And he falls in love with Ra's daughter. And yeah, I mean, to me, that's just phenomenal and made such an impact on me.
Wow. That's really high praise, man. Really.
Yeah, I mean, Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. That's why the two of them together meant so much to me over the years.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, I said earlier that Snyder and Capullo were a dynamic duo team. Well, how can you say that Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil were not? They 100% were.
Absolutely.
100%. So,
and what's your number one?
I think it's interesting that you and I are both avid comic book readers, and Batman is by far my favorite character. But I think it's interesting that you and I, our choices really didn't overlap. I kind of thought they might, but they haven't.
Yeah, they haven't, have they?
No. And like my number one will not overlap any of yours. My number one choice is by far my favorite Batman story. I have owned, I think, this story in every possible format other than digital. I've owned it in an absolute version. I just recently bought the Batman Noir version. I have hardcover. I have a trade paperback, which is my reading copy. But I think for me, the definitive Batman story is The Long Halloween by
it's a great one.
Bale and Jeff Loeb. It is, if you really like the world's greatest detective aspect of Batman, this is the story for you. It's such the way it winds through 13 issues, and each issue represents a specific month, and almost pretty much every Batman villain is represented in the story, and without giving away too much, because I don't want to spoil this for any of the listeners that may not have read it yet. It's hard to talk about it without spoiling it, but it's definitely influential in other media representations of Batman. You can see shades of The Long Halloween in Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. You can see shades of it elsewhere, but it's such a great read.
Yeah.
I actually read The Long Halloween probably once a year.
And Loeb made a great mystery of the story. It really keeps you guessing and keeps you on your toes as a reader.
It does, and that's exactly what I love about it. Just the way it's written, that you really don't know how it's going to end until it ends.
Right.
The first time I read it, you were talking about how, the Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams stories made you feel as a kid. The way The Long Halloween made me feel after I finished it, like no other Batman stories, and I've read some really great ones, but no other one has captured that feeling for me the way The Long Halloween did.
Wow. And I remember seeing Tim Sale's name on Grendel. I was a big Grendel fan. His artwork was really nice on Grendel. And then he did, I believe he and Jeff Loeb had done Challengers of the Unknown, and that was a really great one too. But then when they did Long Halloween, I mean, his art just leapt off the page. It was stunning art. Unlike anything that had come before, really.
Is Jeff Loeb still, does he still write comics? I know he kind of went on to become one of the architects of the MCU, but I don't know if he's still actually writing comics or not.
I haven't seen his name as a writer for quite a while. I think when he moved over, when they started Marvel Television with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at ABC, and then they did the four or five Netflix shows, and Cloak and Dagger, which is also really good. I just started watching that one over on Hulu. So I think he kept himself busy over the last 5 or 6 years doing Marvel TV shows. So maybe now that Marvel TV shows are ending, except for what's going to be on Disney Plus, maybe he'll move back to writing more comics.
Yeah. So Tony and I want to introduce a new segment on this episode, and the working title for it is "What You're Reading," and basically we're going to talk about whatever comics Tony and I are reading at the time of recording any particular episode. So, Tony, what you reading?
Well, I noticed right before the pandemic, I think was when they were introduced, or maybe right after, a brand new company came out called AWA Upshot, I believe it is, AWA Comics. It's the head of the company is Bill Hamas, who used to run Marvel back in the day, and he got some really awesome talent to put some amazing books together, but I don't know if anybody notices them on the shelves with everything else coming out, but he got J.M. Straczynski from Babylon 5 to write the flagship book, The Resistance, which happens to be about people getting superpowers from a pandemic. Imagine that. And this was written a year before the year we're living in. And, you know, he got a simple horror comic called Hotel. It's about the horrors going on in this hotel. Red Border was really cool, where this wealthy family from Mexico couldn't prove who they were, and they got mixed in with other people just trying to cross the border, and so they were scared for their lives. And he got Ben Percy wrote a couple, Year Zero, I believe, and so he got some really great talent on some really cool books, and everything I've read from that company has been really solid. You know, it's great indie kind of stuff. Just you know, I guess Resistance is a little more real world superheroes, where everything else is more just, you know, more grounded in reality or horror, or, you know, a little bit of superheroes. But yeah, it's a great company to check out for sure.
Very cool. Very cool.
What are you reading?
So, well, several months ago, I pre-ordered. It's funny that you mentioned the Cloak and Dagger a few minutes ago, because I pre-ordered the Cloak and Dagger Volume 1 Omnibus by Bill Mantlo, among other. Mantlo, I'm pretty sure Mantlo created Cloak and Dagger. I think they're
the TV series credits Mantlo and Ed Hannigan. Yeah.
Okay. Cloak and Dagger are, let's be honest, they're probably C-list characters in the Marvel universe.
Sure.
But I have always had a huge place in my heart for them. I just think they're an interesting story. I think my personal opinion is, I had this conversation with someone recently, is that there's not really a definitive Cloak and Dagger story. And I think that's kind of a shame, because I just think that if they got paired with the right writers now, I really think that they could at least move up to the B list. I haven't started. I watched 2 episodes of the Cloak and Dagger series on Freeform, and then it went away, and now I would have to pay for it, which I'm not opposed to.
It's on Hulu. If you have Hulu or have a free trial to Hulu, it's definitely worth checking out. I've watched the first 5 of them. I think they're all. It's pretty cool. It's a modern day take on the concept of Cloak and Dagger, and I think I think it's just as strong a television series as any of the Netflix ones, which were all excellent, I thought.
Yeah, but the Cloak and Dagger Omnibus is thus far a great read. It has about 32, 33 issues, something like that. It goes all the way back to their first appearance in the Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, and a story arc that they were involved in with Silvermane. It actually contains the 4-issue Cloak and Dagger miniseries. It goes on to it has some of the New Mutants appearances that they were in. But it's really a great read. It's a fun read. If you like 80s comics, if you like Cloak and Dagger, absolutely worth it.
I remember as a kid, my mom would bring me some comics from where she'd worked, and she brought me some of those Peter Parker Spider-Mans, and it was Cloak and Dagger and Black Cat and those were some really cool stories. I really enjoyed those, and I do remember that miniseries too. It's definitely a great comics for sure.
All right, so this was really a fun episode to do. I really, like I said earlier, I'm a huge Batman fan. I can talk about Batman for hours.
Absolutely.
And Tony and I can talk about comics for hours. So I'm very grateful to StarPodLog for having us back. And,
great to be back.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode, and please make sure to like and share the video. Drop us some comments. Let us know what your favorite Batman stories were or are.
See if there's overlap or see if you have some we missed.
Yeah, exactly. We want to know what you guys. On behalf of StarPodLog, my name is Jeff Wiley.
And I'm Tony Barletta.
Thanks for listening to us, and we'll see you again.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.